Facebook, and if it looks good, then we'll go ahead and let's see here. Okay, looks like everybody's seeing us on Facebook, so I think we're good. I think we're good there. All right, so um, I should have pulled up one more thing before we went live. All right, so hello everyone. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, and welcome to the Jeet Kune Do Dialogues episode number 198. Today we are joined by someone who his name has been recommended to me on several occasions as someone that I should definitely get onto the program. And so today it is my great pleasure to welcome Colm Whooley to the Jeet Kune Do Dialogues. So first off, I apologize for the little technical snafu that we had there. How you doing?
I'm good. No problem at all.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to tease you again. I'm gonna try to put a picture into. Can you see this picture? You don't see anything.
No, I don't.
Okay, I'll have to send it to you afterwards.
Dude.
But there's a former U.S. congressman who you are the spitting image of this guy. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you when we're done. Right.
I won't ask whether he's a Democrat or a Republican.
No. All right. So I think, man, I think it's my internet that is just messing up royally, because now I'm frozen on my end. So, all right, I'm gonna refresh us again and then stop talking. All right. Okay. All right. I think we're good. Okay. So let's get right into this. The accident was what, 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
40 years ago, 1980.
Wow. Okay. And before that, from what I read in your bio, you were doing Kempo, karate, and boxing, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I was doing it for about 5 years up to the time of my accident. Yeah. And a little bit of jiu-jitsu as well.
Okay. All right. So what brought you then to the Jeet Kune Do world? How did that happen?
Okay. I suppose after I had my accident, I spent 9 months in rehab, and I suppose martial arts were way down my list of priorities.
Mm-hmm.
I was just, I suppose, getting my head around being a wheelchair user now.
Yeah.
And I didn't think martial arts were an option again. And it was pure chance on 2 different occasions. My wife knew I was still very interested, and she bought me 2 different magazines at different times. There was a brilliant magazine out some years ago called Bruce Lee. There was a number of these magazines, and they really gave an insight into, I suppose, Bruce Lee's teaching. Up to then, my only experience of Bruce Lee had been the martial arts movies back in the 70s, which I suppose is what got me involved in martial arts in the first place. But I had no access to his philosophy or his real Jeet Kune Do. All I had seen or had any experience was what we saw in the cinema.
Mm-hmm.
But I got the magazine, and I remember there was a phrase, I have it here pinned down on my desk. It's here all the time to read, which is, research your own experience, absorb what is useful, and reject what is useless. And just at the time, it touched a chord, because I'd been looking at different martial artists. I'd gone and met with different martial artists, and some said to me, listen, you're in a wheelchair. It isn't practical. Others were showing me stuff which I knew wasn't practical. Yeah. But something about that. And then I started reading about how Bruce Lee had researched different martial arts, how he'd had to adapt when he came from Hong Kong to the United States because of the larger Americans. So
Right.
it got me thinking about that. Really, what I had to do was do my own research. That there was nothing that was going to be one fits all. I couldn't just go and say this is the martial arts. So at the same time, John Little's books came out. So all of a sudden, I had access to so much information,
Yeah.
and I literally just soaked it up like a sponge. Started reading up, and I started to think, this has something that will work for me, because a lot of it was very close contact. Because, as a wheelchair user, moving around and trying to chase somebody isn't a reality, because if I do that, I'm putting my hands down on the wheels of my wheelchair and I expose my head. So I kept, reading, doing some research, looking at videos. And I was saying, I need to train with somebody who does Jeet Kune Do. And the martial arts, I suppose, field in Ireland, it's quite small. So I thought, what are the chances of there being, somebody in Ireland that does Jeet Kune Do?
Mm-hmm.
And pure chance again, my wife got me another magazine a couple of months later, and there was an article about a martial artist in Northern Ireland called Martin O'Neill.
Right.
I think you've had Martin O'Neill on your program, and this was before the internet. So all I had was his name, the town in Northern Ireland where he was from, and that was it, nothing else.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was working as the CEO of Spinal Injuries Ireland, which was a support organisation in a rehab hospital for people who'd sustained a spinal cord injury like myself. So at the back of my mind, my initial journey was about me. I wanted to get back, I wanted to experience and learn martial arts myself. But I also, looking at and seeing the newer patients, I felt if we could develop something that we could introduce to the patient in the hospital, it would have a huge benefit as well. So it was,
Right.
I was thinking about myself, but I was also thinking, listen, if this works for me, we can introduce it to patients. So I fired off a letter, as I said, his name, the town, and pretty much that was it. And I thought, listen, this could spend its time circulating around the globe and it'll never find Martin. But it did. And I got a reply. I had asked him, was there any chance that he would, meet and consider looking to see if this was an option. And straight away, no hesitation, Martin came back and said, absolutely. And within a couple of weeks, he did a round trip, I think, of probably 300 miles to come down to the rehab centre. And it was just, from day one, it just blew my mind away. Now, obviously, at the start, Martin and I were both very honest with each other. We looked at each other and we said, where do we start? So, Martin would go through the various things, just the basic principles, the different fighting zones, different traps to see which of them might work. And we would try them, we would pressure test them. I would be driving home, heading back to my house. Martin would be getting the train back up home. And by the time we both got home, on a number of occasions, we both would have come to the same conclusion, and we would have sent each other a message to say, that's not going to work, but we'll try something else. And Martin just kept coming down. I travelled up to him. And slowly but surely, we started to refine it and see what worked. For example, Lopsau worked really well for us because as a wheelchair user, moving out away from my body compromises my balance. So Paxau doesn't work because, I'm sitting in a wheelchair. The dynamics and laws of physics, if I push against somebody, the wheelchair moves back. Whereas Lopsau, if I pull somebody towards me and trap it, works an awful lot better. So, at the start, we looked at all the different traps and we said, okay, this one doesn't work. We started to refine it. We looked at different elements. I would go up to Martin up in Lurgan, up in Northern Ireland, and he would come down. And I might only come away with one little element uh, that we could apply to what we were trying to do. But that was enough. I knew over time if we worked on it. And Martin and I have been working for over 20 years. It's hard to believe. It's as I said, it was pre-internet, and then the internet came along and it made it an awful lot easier for us to link up. But we eventually were able to look at each other and honestly say that we had something that was real and realistic, because I was starting to teach and Martin was coming down and we were teaching patients. And I remember when I would go and talk to the patients and say, listen, would you be interested in learning, some self-defense? And these were people who were probably very active before their accident. And they were now saying, hold on, I'm in a wheelchair. How can I do martial arts? So we knew that we when we were showing these individuals something, it had to be honest, because they were going to be very critical. They were going to say straight away, this doesn't work for me in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
So we as I said, we refined it, we pressure tested it. That involved me being tipped out of my chair, pulled out of my chair, knocked out of my chair. And as I said, ultimately we came up with a program that has evolved and continues to evolve. And I've since, I'm now an instructor with Martin the last couple of years. I've travelled to Europe to train with one of Taki Kimura's instructors in Belgium. I've trained with Andy Kimura on a number of occasions. I've attended a couple of seminars with Tim Tackett and a couple of other guys. And as I said, I might only come away with one little thing, or I may not come away with anything. But even if I didn't come away with something, I was able to eliminate stuff as well. And that was important, so that we didn't waste time going down an avenue that was never going to work for us. So I never, even if I traveled over to a conference in the UK and England, and I came away and I said, well, none of that's going to work for me. It didn't matter, because we were able to refine it and say, okay, we do not have to pursue that. And then, as I said, we have a course now and a foundation that I can honestly say, hand on heart, provides real and effective self-defense for wheelchair users. That's what it was always all about. As I said, initially it was my own journey.
Right.
I wanted to learn, but then when I saw how it could benefit patients, that just changed my whole attitude. For me, then it was about getting the message out to as many people as possible, using forums like Your Good Self, and writing for various magazines, and just getting the message out. I suppose I feel I have two audiences I need to talk to. One is the individual with the disability, the wheelchair user, and the other is instructors. Because when I talk to instructors, on a lot of occasions, they're very honest. They will say, listen, I don't know how to deal with somebody in a wheelchair, or I don't understand the dynamics. So, the course that I've put together, and I'll go into more details about that, we look at that so that we address the issues that the concerns an instructor would have, because they're real. They're afraid they're going to say something to offend somebody. Now, I'm in a wheelchair 40 years. There's nothing would offend me now. And to be honest, people say stuff and they don't say it with malice. There's a term that would not be considered appropriate. And people have said it to me, and I've just explained to them, listen, just for your own sake, because if you're talking to another wheelchair user, the term confined to a wheelchair would be a real no-no. Whether it's in the USA or here in Ireland or in Europe, the term people would be comfortable with is a wheelchair user.
Yeah.
So
if I could just interject.
Sure, of course.
Because confined is a ridiculous term. I've seen pictures of you skydiving. You are. Do you call it PADI or is it PADI? You're certified.
Just a little.
Okay, right. But you're a scuba diver.
Yes.
Right, and you are now. I don't have the courage to go into a kayak by myself, because I'm afraid it will flip over and that'll be the end of me. But
It's happened. It's happened.
so confined really is a dumb word in this
Yeah.
context.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think
Sorry
I
to
think
interject.
not at all. I think probably what confines us is people's attitude.
Mhm.
It's people's perception. And I suppose what I want to do now is, get the message out to instructors, look beyond the wheelchair.
Yes.
Um, and I was getting messages when I wrote articles from people in the United States and the UK and whatever, saying, could I come and teach? And the reality is, I'm one person and it just wouldn't be practical. I had a mom contacted me about a year ago, 2 years ago, and said her little boy, they lived in Colorado. She brought him down to the local club or a martial arts school, and they just said they didn't know how to teach somebody in a wheelchair. They weren't rude. They just were very honest and said, look, we just don't know.
Yeah.
So she got on to me and said, was there any chance I'd be coming over to America? And I said, look, I may be over there, but I certainly wouldn't be able to travel all around. It just wouldn't be practical. And that's when I started to think, how can I get a message out and do something that will enable other instructors to do it, so that when somebody comes through their door,
Right.
they don't, they're not rejecting somebody. They're being honest. They could take someone in and stick them in a corner and show them stuff which they, heart and soul, know wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And I know they don't want to do that. So I'd been also training with Andy and Greg in Defense Lab. I know you had Andy and Greg on.
Yeah.
Recently.
I wanted to talk to you about that
Sure.
specifically because we have a produce store here in South Florida called Norman Brothers, and you've worked with both Normans, right? With Phil and Andy,
Yeah.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Now,
so that's very
with Phil, what he was doing didn't really work, and that's fine. But just with Andy and Greg, the Defense Lab stuff just worked so well because, again, it's very close. It's very circular, and that didn't compromise our bounds. So yeah, amazing guys.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. It's so. I'll tell you again. It's so wonderful to be able to talk to you about this. Um, so I'm gonna try it again. You probably can't see the photograph,
Nope.
but I'm hoping that it comes out in the final edit. But this is one of you. It's 4-on-1. You in
Some
the
sparring.
chair.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and the guys have the focus mitts. You
That's
familiar
right.
with that one?
Oh,
Yeah.
I am. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So give us the background of what's going on here.
Again, what that was, we wanted to look at the dynamics of moving around while still protecting. Because I'm sitting down, the key target for somebody to attack is my head.
Yeah.
For example, they're not going to come and punch me in the stomach because it's too low. Like, why would they pass this target? Looking for something else. So what we were doing there, and by the end of the session, my ears were ringing a little bit. We were looking at how I could move around without compromising my head when I moved around. So we looked at the dynamics of the chair, and one of the things we worked on is, you won't see it in me here, but is stopping my wheelchair with my elbows. So in other words, I wasn't bringing my hands all the way down. I was stopping them with my elbows, which meant I could get my hands back up to protect my head. So that's what we were working on there. It was just, I suppose, again, it was pressure testing. It was look what would work. I know one of the things they do in the Fed Lab is they call it the form box. So I suppose in its own way, that's what we were doing, which was looking at, people moving around, me looking at how I could move around and still keep myself protected. So yeah, at the end of that session, my ears were ringing a little bit.
Okay. There's also there's two shots of this, but it's you working against what we call here the red man, the guy in
Yes.
the big red suit. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah. What about that?
Yeah. Again, what we were doing there, one of the things we discovered was, for me, if somebody is standing up, I cannot reach to hit them in the head. But the reality is, if they want to hit me, they have to move into what we now call my zone. For
Okay.
example, one of the things when we got people to say, okay, you know, attack column, move around, see what you would do. In a lot of cases, people instinctively either grab me or they reach down to strike. If somebody grabs me, that gives me a really nice opportunity. We see that as a golden opportunity, because one, when they reach down, straight away their head is now within my range. But
Uh-huh.
a very simple trap that works really well for us is we bring our arm over, we pull it down on the attacker's arm, and we trap it in against their chest. It pulls them right down into us, and then we can palm strike, or if it was really something serious, we can use a bit or something. So with the red man move, that's what we were working on, which was, if somebody came in close, grabbed, how we could defend ourselves against that, and then ultimately to see if we put somebody on the ground, which takes a little bit more time and practice.
Yeah. This is I used to have a saying that if you could teach kids, you can teach anybody. But now
Yeah,
I'm thinking, right now I'm thinking, if you can teach a wheelchair user, you can teach anybody.
yeah. I mean, I think any of the instructors who I've worked with, I think, and it's not about me, but what happens is it gives them a different insight into what they're teaching.
Yes.
It gets them to do a little bit more lateral thinking. Uh, as I said, just to explain and give an example about some of the dynamics when I would travel and go to a seminar, when I would arrive, to be fair, I'd arrive into the training center at a seminar, whatever it was, at a show or something. I would see the instructors going, okay, it's a guy in a wheelchair down the end. Has he come to the wrong seminar? And what I would do is I would take them aside for a couple of minutes and I'd say, look, very interested in what you're teaching. I understand 90% of what you're doing won't work for me. What I'm going to do is sit at the back and have a look. And maybe at the end of it, if you've got a couple of minutes, if there's one particular technique which I feel works really well for me, maybe we would go through it.
Mm-hmm.
So I was being fair and honest with them. I didn't just arrive in and go, okay, I want you to facilitate me within a class, and there's 20
Yeah.
other guys that have paid
Right.
as well.
Right.
And that worked really well. And as I said, I went to numerous seminars in the UK, and as I said, I've gone and trained in Belgium as well. So, and I found then that instructors are very open. Once you remove that little bit of, God, how do I work with this guy? I don't
Yeah.
know what to say, And I think very quickly when they realise that you're relaxed about your disability, and that I don't bite most of the time, um, they they they're more than keen to
Yeah.
work with you. And as I said, that's what I want to do now. That is my goal, and that's why, as I said, I linked up with Andy and Greg. And again, that's another example. I mean, I've been so lucky. I met Martin O'Neill, and I've been training with him for 20 years. There's a really good friend of mine who has been at the other end of me throwing stuff and trying stuff is James Devine. James was another martial artist who I would go and train with, and James was great because when I was trying stuff out, I could meet up with James and say, "Look, I just want to go through stuff." And James was very good. He'd try stuff, and we'd move around. We'd look at something, and again we would eliminate stuff. So as I said, there's there's a real openness. As you know, martial artists, the one thing martial artists love is sharing their experience with others. It's it's the thing. Once it goes beyond what they've learned themselves, they love
Right.
sharing
Yeah.
and empowering people.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to take it to another level. And I reached out to Andy and Greg and I said, look, I've been doing the defense lab myself, but I'm wondering, is it possible that maybe we could put something together
Mhm.
that we could get out online on a course to people around the world? I didn't have those resources myself. And again, it was a simple email I sent to Andy and Greg, and they could have come back and said, listen, think what you're doing is lovely. Thanks very much. Bye. But it's not something that we would be interested in. But
Right.
they came back and they said, come over, come on over and we'll put the time aside and we'll meet up. That was, what was that? That was over 3 years ago when I first
Mhm.
went over. And I've been working with Andy and Greg since. And we've just finished filming the online course. And again, as I said, between Martin O'Neill, James Devine, Andy and Greg, these people have just given their time to me, which is just, I pinch myself all the time,
Yeah.
saying how amazing these guys, because the one thing that they all did was they all saw beyond my wheelchair. And that's what I want other instructors to do. If a
Right.
mom brings her young son or daughter into their school, is that they say, I now have the resources to work with this young guy or this young girl or an adult, whatever it is, who
Mhm.
pushes in and facilitate them in my class. I mean, that's my goal now.
Yeah. To me, this is everybody does the lip service thing because it's become popular online. Bruce Lee talking about honestly expressing oneself,
Yes,
right? But I think a lot of people hide behind that expression, and right. So they're not what you're involved in, and people who deal with you. It all has to be based in honesty.
absolutely. It's the key. It's the
Yeah,
foundation. You know,
yeah,
it because again, I, I feel I have a responsibility. Look, it's like whether you're teaching able-bodied people or wheelchair users, we all know that some people are naturally better than others, and we all know in a real street situation. Uh, I always remember the quote from Mike Tyson: "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face." So we know the dynamics in a real street situation is very different to training in a school. But if you can give people the skill set, we all know, well, I certainly know, that since I learned martial arts after my accident, it, it after I started to do the martial arts, I took up the kayaking, I took up the parachute jumping, I took up the scuba diving. I hadn't done any of them
before.
until I started doing the martial arts because it gave me a confidence.
Right.
And only a couple of weeks ago, uh, ex-patient from the rehab hospital contacted me. I haven't seen him probably in, gosh, I haven't seen him probably in 10 or 12 years. And he reminded me uh, that he was going through his local town and there were a group of young lads who were just being a little bit awkward, standing around, making their presence felt. And he said, he went through them, just pushed on through them, moved on through them. He said he didn't have to do anything, but he said he just felt more confident. And as we all know, you know, people on the street who are looking for somebody to bully, they single out people that they get a sense these are the sort of people
Right.
I can pick on. So
Yeah.
again, he didn't have to do anything, but it helped with his confidence. So I I think for me, martial arts isn't just about learning techniques. It's about giving us confidence, but equally one of the other elements that is so important as well, particularly the people I'm focusing on, is they become part of a community. And we all know that, you go and you join a club or you go on the seminar. I know you were away for a few weeks. There's nothing more enjoyable than learning and working with our peers and sharing our experiences and challenging ourselves. And if if I can get it so that, schools around the United States can, will start to think about facilitating wheelchair users. I mean, that that is my goal now.
Mhm.
So that, as I said, when a mom brings or a dad brings their young daughter or son in, or somebody after they have an accident or whatever their disability is, they wheel in, that the club would start to look, as I said, I keep saying it, but beyond their wheelchair.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, when we're finished with this, and I do the final edit video and everything, um, you have to tell me how else I can assist
Sure.
in putting this out there. I mean, to me, this is the start. But if you tell me, I mean, you can do. I'll send you the video. You do whatever you need to with
Thank you.
it. But anything that I can do on the back end or behind the scenes, I'm more than willing.
And listen, absolutely. And the more people, I'll give you my address, but also I'll give you a link where people can look at a short video which gives in a little insight into the course. As I said, in a year's time, if I can look back and think that there are people, if I hear that there's somebody in Colorado or in Boston or New York or in London or wherever it is, and they're now doing martial arts with their peers that they wouldn't have been able to do before. That for me, that's what it's all about,
Yeah.
because I know
Yeah.
how much I enjoy it. Like,
Right.
you probably can't see it, excuse me, but there's a bookshelf of books behind it. As my good wife says, anytime I buy a new martial arts book, she's still trying to figure out how could there be anything else I'd want to buy or read, particularly on Bruce Lee. I'm afraid as soon as I see, I've all the original books that were either, written by Bruce Lee, or obviously we know a lot of them were written afterwards. But I've books by Chris Kent. I've,
Yeah.
Dana Santo, and when I read these, you feel you're part of something, and that I want wheelchair users like myself to start feeling part of a bigger community, because we all know there's nothing more enjoyable than going to a seminar and meeting with like-minded people and sharing experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, community and, being in it for others, these are things, again, that a lot of us, we pay lip service to it. We're aware of it, but it's in the back of our mind. I think that in your situation brings it to the forefront and makes people deal with it honestly. It makes it an upfront thing, and it just amplifies or multiplies everything that an able-bodied person like me that I go through. In talking with you, I'm like, it makes perfect sense, right?
As I said, one of the things I think, that when you work with somebody who's a wheelchair user, has a disability, I think it gives you a deeper insight into your martial arts, because
Yes.
you really, you look at the different elements. If we just take JKD and we look at the different ranges, well, straight away their ranges just don't work for me. So it gets the instructor to think, okay, obviously working in close works much better for a wheelchair user. So they really have to drill down, that element of it, and look at what works. Like, just to give you an example, something that we certainly didn't discover for the first couple of years. If you see, for example, when I'm sitting talking to you towards camera, I'm sitting facing on, and we found, it took us a long time to figure it out. It was one of those light bulb moments. If I sit facing an attacker, one, I present a bigger target. Two, the laws of physics and the dynamics of a wheelchair. If somebody hits me hard enough in the chest and my chair moves a certain way, it'll flip back onto its back. And believe me, only about 6 or 7 days ago, I was doing something else and I flipped back out of my chair, and my back is still reminding me how sore it is. But what we discovered is, if we use the principle of our strong lead forward, so we position our chair. For example, what we teach is, if you're confronted, you turn and position it so that your right knee is facing the center line of your attacker. That means it gives me a greater range with my lead punch. It reduces my target. But more importantly, if somebody strikes me when I'm positioning my chair at that angle, my chair won't tip over. It'll swing around. But equally, if somebody is in and grabs me and it swings around, we found that I can put somebody on the ground very quickly, because think about it. Think about an office chair with wheels on it, and lean on that and push it, and you're going to fall over. So just the dynamics of that. So as I said, over all these years, we discovered, just that simple thing of how we position the chair. I mentioned earlier about fighting within our zone. That came about. I travelled over to train with Alain over in Belgium, and amazing guy, has been training with Taki Kimura for years, and he had all his instructors, and I brought about 6 patients from the rehab over, and we spent a whole weekend, literally early in the morning till the evening, training. And one of the things that I came away from that weekend with was that we cannot chase an attacker. In other words, if I do that, my ears are going to be ringing. I'm going to be knocked out of my chair. So what we did was we worked on fighting within our zone. So in other words, if somebody is outside the zone, they're not a threat to us. Once they move inside the zone, we see that as an opportunity to respond. So as I said, it was, to go back to Bruce Lee, it was about accumulating stuff that worked for us. And as I said, it's taken over 20 years. As I said, when I think back to all the stuff that Martin and I did at the start, and then we would come back a couple of weeks later and say, no, forget about that. That isn't going to work. It's when I say to people it's taken 20 years, it's taken 20 years to develop where we are now in the course. But I've been training in martial arts since my accident, 1980. But it was really only when I started looking at JKD that I really, things started to click. Up to that, I was just going through the motions. Yeah. Because it just wasn't practical.
Yeah. This is incredible, because almost every week we have a silly Facebook argument about Jeet Kune Do, and
yes,
right, and some of us are constantly trying to promote the message that Jeet Kune Do, a major part of Jeet Kune Do is about adaptability, is about adaptation.
Absolutely.
Right? As opposed to it's this set way that we got from Bruce Lee or from whomever. And I think, again, you are a perfect example of what JKD has to offer to everyone, and not just to the athletically inclined. To you understand what I'm saying?
Absolutely. It's not one size fits all, and that's what I like so much about it. As I said, every time John Little brought out a book, and I was actually fortunate to meet him. Himself and John Bishop came over some years ago. Martin brought them over, and they gave a talk in Trinity College on the philosophy of Bruce Lee. Yes. So the more I read, as I said right at the start of this conversation, prior to my injury, my only experience, to be honest, it certainly piqued interest and got me interested in doing martial arts, but I never actually sat down and looked at obviously we know what he did on the screen and what he did, outside, off the screen, were two different things, but it didn't touch a chord with me at all. It was only when I started to get his writings and John Little's books, so much to offer everybody, not just me, obviously not just me as a wheelchair user, but it is a shame to see so much stuff online where people are arguing, because to me they're missing the point. It's Bruce Lee recognized that one size doesn't fit all. You've only to look at, if you look at what Dan Santo was was teaching compared to what Taki Kimura was teaching or Ted Wong was teaching. They were all it was all part of what Bruce Lee was teaching. But as far as I'm concerned, when I look at them, absolutely there's a core element that's the same, but there's a huge amount of differences.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it so great.
Exactly, right? See, so as you probably well know, part of the argument is that Dan Inosanto has added to Jeet Kune Do and what have you, infamously Filipino Kali. There's the famous picture of you with the single stick.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? Okay. So weigh in on that, on the weapons aspect of your Jeet Kune Do training.
Well, again, it was looking at what would give us what I would call an equalizer. In other words,
Yes.
I have to be realistic. If I remember a guy who obviously his background isn't JKD, but a guy called Kelly McCann. He does combatives.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading some of his stuff because, again, as I said, I was looking at everything, trying to little bits of this or whatever. And I started to look at weapons, and Kali again. I liked the movements; they were very circular. Again, I thought they worked very well for us. Listen, like everything, I'm still learning. I haven't done a huge amount of Kali, but it gives us, one of the things it does is it increases our range.
Yes.
Which is so important because, for example, one of the things, certainly from my level of injury, I had a motorbike accident, so I broke my back quite high. So my balance would be quite, well, it there's worse than me, but if I throw a punch and I go all the way out, my balance is compromised and I'll follow the punch. So for me, I have to keep my strikes in fairly close. Mm-hmm. But by doing Kali, it gives me a greater range, and it also gives me new targets, which I just wouldn't have without using Kali. Like, right. For example, the target that works really well for us that somebody up standing wouldn't particularly think about is the knee, because the knee is very close to us. Whereas if you're standing up doing Kali, you're not thinking about somebody's knee. Mm-hmm. You're thinking about their head, or maybe their elbows, or their hands, or whatever it is. But for us, does the hips or the kidneys or the knees as initial strikes. Right. So yeah, Kali has been something I've been really interested in. I've looked at Sealad as well. I've looked at knives, and it's something. It's something I'm always reluctant to. I certainly would discuss and teach a little bit of knife, but I think it's a topic all on its own, and again, there's real honesty involved when you're using a knife, because we all know the realities of either defending yourself against a knife or trying to defend yourself against a knife, and using a knife. But again, they are an equalizer. Now, in Ireland and certainly in the UK, we don't have access to firearms. I'm always intrigued when I see the number of guns you guys have. But as I said, knives wouldn't be allowed here. But one of the things I found really nice is a Kubotan, because again, if somebody comes in close, we can strike or we can trap. So I've looked at. I'm still looking. I mean, that's what I enjoy so much. Yeah. Is anyone who says that they've learned everything, and that's what I loved about Dan Inosanto was he was I would see he was now doing working with the Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys, and I was thinking, wow, he was constantly adding. And I honestly believe if Bruce Lee had lived longer, I believe he would have explored, different martial arts as they become more accessible. You've only to look at his library. He had videos on boxing. I know he was fascinated with Muhammad Ali and some of the earlier boxers. So, yeah. And we know his background. He certainly did some fencing, or his brother did some fencing. So, yeah. I think that's all part of the journey.
Yeah, you mentioned the Kubaton. Do you know if the telescopic baton is legal for civilians to carry in
In
Ireland?
no, it isn't. No, but again,
Oh,
I would teach it. Um,
right.
the Irish were dangerous enough without weapons. Um,
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I do teach them the same as knives because I think it's important because uh, when I teach them, I'm aware that I'm hoping, as I said, that the course will be available to people over in the States or other countries where these things are
Right.
allowed.
Yes.
And I think it's important to train with weapons because, and listen, I'm talking to you, you know this better than I do. But by training with weapons, it gives you an insight into the dynamics of defending yourself against them. You
Yeah.
know,
Um, okay. So I wanted to start wrapping this up, but
sure.
okay, I got to ask you this because when I was going through your bio, right, and it said that, let's see, you were a graphic designer before the accident, or
Yes,
something, right?
yes,
Okay, but then it said that after the accident, you studied architecture and engineering drawing.
yes. I went back to college. Yeah,
Okay, so I thought to myself when I read that, I go, I wonder if Colm said, well, if I'm going to be sitting down a lot more, I can at least get paid to do it.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. To be honest, the other reason, if I'm very honest, why I went back to college was, um, you know, the person you're talking to now is very different to the young 21-year-old that was now using a wheelchair. And I was coming to terms with it. Up to my accident, I was riding around on motorbikes doing all sorts of mad stuff, and I thought it was bulletproof.
Yeah.
So going to college was a real opportunity for me to uh, give myself some breathing space and work with peers and understand the dynamics of uh, how when people meet you initially, uh, they see the disability. But again, within a few weeks of being at college, give a very quick story. When I was started classes, we would all use these drawing boards, which were sloped. So you'd put your pens down, and invariably they would roll off onto the ground. And for the first few days, there'd be a mad stampede of all the other students running up to grab the pen from me off the floor. But very quickly, they saw that I could reach down and pick it up just as quickly as they could. And after, I'd say about a week, I could honestly say to myself, they don't see my disability anymore. They just see another student.
Yes.
So while I went to college to gain another skill, in a lot of ways, it was around giving me some breathing space and helping me to. I'm not saying we have to be our own ambassadors, but to be fair to individuals, nobody wants to offend anybody. And as I said, I was CEO of Spinal Injuries Ireland for 21 years. So I worked with a lot of patients, and I've always reminded people that you have, whether it's fair or not, you have a responsibility for your own sake to educate or put people at ease. So that they're not afraid to mention your wheelchair. The best place where I always find I end up educating people is if I get a taxi. I don't know about in the States, but I literally have only got the seatbelt clicked on the when I get into the taxi, and they have to ask me, what happened, when it happened, where it happened, who it happened with. Uh, taxi drivers. Well, certainly over here they like to talk. So
Yes.
I don't mind doing that because if when I get out of that car, they have a different perception of people who are wheelchair users, that in itself was a bonus.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that journey, is that what led to, I forget the name of the outfit, but that's what led to your being a coach and a speaker?
Yeah, I'll tell you what actually happened was I was asked by a British charity, would I go over and help set up a, a spinal cord injury organization in Nepal, in Asia.
Ah,
And I'm thought, my God, this is some journey. And I went home and I thought, oh, okay, this will be a bit of a challenge. And I thought, why not?
right.
and I was still CEO of Spinal Injuries at the time, and travelled over. I think it took about 24 hours between flights to get over there. A different world altogether. The most amazing people I've ever met, and I know everybody says things and cliches about people, but it changed my life. And when I was there and I was giving talks, and they were asking me things, and asking me about my experience back in Ireland, because we were so far ahead with the resources we have.
Yeah.
I felt I wasn't able to empower or support them as much as I wanted. So I came back and I decided that within a year or two, I would retire as CEO of Spinal Injuries and become a coach and work with people with a disability, or with companies to I suppose, educate them to see beyond disability. So that's my real job. And as I said, the martial arts would be my passion.
Right. Yeah. Wow. I don't know what to say. Like I said to you off camera, man, I've never even broken a bone in all
Oh
my
well,
years.
I've broken enough for us all, so we're okay.
Right. So when I'm in the company of someone like you, I'm humbled by it and grateful for for what I've been able to experience, but then grateful to have the opportunity to share and learn from somebody like you.
But equally, as I said, and I've said at the start, for me, when I met Martin or Greg or Andy or James, when I would work with these guys, and when I'd leave and I'd be heading home, whether it was on a plane or driving back home, I was blown away. But that, as I keep saying, these people saw beyond my disability,
Yeah.
and they, as you can tell, I'm on my soapbox. This is a real passion of mine. But Martin, gave me so much time over 20 years. I would email him or ring him and say, listen, could you come down and do some training? Or I'd go up, and he never said no.
Right.
Equally, James, who, as I said, was a guinea pig and a punch bag for lots of stuff, and never said no. And Andy and Greg, even now, I'm back in Ireland, they're in Spain, but I'm talking to one of them on a daily basis, just running things by them, and they feel as passionate now about it, and that to me is better, because whatever about me just being passionate about it, they're part of a bigger community than I'm ever going to be part of. And if when they talk to an instructor or somebody else and say, listen, teaching somebody in a wheelchair, it's real and it's practical, and you can teach them really quality, effective techniques.
Mm-hmm.
That's far more effective than me saying it, because they have a greater platform than I have. And as I said, I feel privileged. As I said, I could pick up the phone tomorrow, and Martin, I know, if I said, listen, could you come down and do some training? They don't hesitate. So while I'm flattered that you say what I've brought today has impressed you, but equally I've been impressed by all the people who've given me time, including as I said to you, I trained with Andy Kimura. He came over to Ireland and ran a seminar for us in the patients. So as I said, I feel martial arts has introduced me to a group of people that I wouldn't have got to meet.
Yeah.
So I feel privileged. I think, to be honest, anyone part of this community, every so often we should step back, or in my case, roll back, and and just realize we're part of a very special community.
Exactly.
That can empower people.
Yes, this is the real Jeet Kune Do community, not the silly Facebook arguments.
No, I've given up on that. I block. I block. Life is too short.
Exactly. This is the real Jeet Kune Do. All right. So I usually ask people who I should try to get on the program. I've made a note already. I should get Alan and James on here, shouldn't I?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Well,
I'll have to make sure they're not going to say anything bad about me first.
All right. And okay, so Colm, what's the best way to get in touch with you? What's the best website?
Well, if can I give you my email? That's probably the
Sure,
best option initially.
sure.
It's Colm at defenselab.com. And
Okay.
Colm is Colm, and then at defenselab.com. And if I can send you a link, you might put it up and people can click on that,
Yeah,
and it'll give them access to information on the course. And
yeah,
really, I would love, more than anything, if no question is silly. If there's somebody watching this and they're thinking, I have this question, but it's probably silly. It's not silly. And, I would love, I'm looking to see somebody here in Cincinnati or whatever, if people just reach out, and at the end of today, I feel that there are people around the United States or around Europe or wherever are going to start thinking about how can we facilitate wheelchair use. Because can I very briefly just give you a couple of statistics?
sure.
Violence against disabled people has doubled in 1 year. Young disabled people are twice as likely to be bullied as their able-bodied peers. Violence against wheelchair users has, in the last decade, has shot up. I mean, I have newspaper headlines here. There was a serviceman who was last year was beaten to death by somebody, and the guy who did it, when he was arrested, bragged about it. There's been wheelchair users put in a coma. I'm looking at stuff here. Knocked out of their wheelchair. When I first got involved in martial arts as a disabled person, it was highly unlikely that I was ever going to get attacked. But that has changed.
Mhm.
We're now seen as legitimate targets, and I have world reports from the World Health Organization to say that it's increasing annually. So I've had martial artists saying to me, instructors saying, "Why would you have to teach somebody in a wheelchair? Who'd attack a wheelchair user?" That day has changed. We're now
Right,
seen as
right.
legitimate targets. So there's a real reason for instructors to teach. I'm going to get off my soapbox now because
Oh, no,
I
no,
forget
please
to
do.
stop.
No, 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 no. Okay, so then, yeah, send me every link
Please, I will
that
indeed.
you think will work, and when I put up the final edit video, I'll have it all in the description box and what have you. And yeah, man, this was great.
And
This,
And thank you. I've enjoyed watching all your podcasts, and as I said, more importantly, I really appreciate you taking the time. As I said, but next time you'll have to learn to maybe get me to shut up a little bit more. You can do a bit more of the talking.
believe me, you're way more interesting than I am.
The novelty wears off very quick.
All right. Well, listen, man. Thank you so much
And thank
again,
you.
and give Martin my and Andy my best regards when next you talk to them.
And I'll pass it on to Martin and James as well.
All right. Okay. All right. Take care, man.
You too.
Ah, see, that's what makes it all worth it, right? All right. So that was episode 190. Where were we? 198. Coming up in another 3 hours or so, we'll be back, episode 199 with Bill Hurst. So if you guys don't have much else to do, stick around, all right? And I'll see you on the next episode. Take care.